honorable members of your delegation, distinguished officials, members of the media, good afternoon. I take this opportunity to once again thank you, Your Excellency Prime Minister Kishida Fumio, and your delegation for honoring us with your very important visit. It is important to point out that you also visited Kenya in 2016. Your Excellency, I want to encourage you to feel at home here in Nairobi. Find some time to enjoy the magical delights that our city and country offer. A few minutes from here, Mr. Prime Minister, we have a natural national park. And if you find a few minutes, it would be welcome for you to visit. And we have all animals, the big five, the lions. Sometimes, Mr. Prime Minister, they escape from the national park. So if you meet a lion in the street, just be careful because it is wild. I am delighted to report that the Prime Minister and I have just concluded highly productive bilateral discussions on a broad range of very important issues. During our meeting, I affirmed to His Excellency Prime Minister that his visit coming on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Kenya and Japan is indicative of the primacy with which Japan accords Kenya as an ally. I assured His Excellency the Prime Minister that Kenya fully reciprocates this consideration. The meeting provided us with another opportunity to evaluate our shared values and mutual commitment to uphold a rules-based international order. Additionally, during our meeting, I conveyed to His Excellency the Prime Minister my high regard for Japan's long-standing bilateral partnership with Kenya in infrastructure development, trade and investment, the blue economy, and human capital development, just to mention a few. The Prime Minister and I exchanged views on numerous international issues of mutual interest, including those that Kenya, as an African state, especially desires Japan to take up in capacity as the chair of 2023 G7. Foremost among this, I emphasize the need to refocus effective global attention on forgotten conflicts in Africa. I've revisited our agreement with the recent G7 ministerial statement, which noted the urgent need to reinforce peace and security in the Horn of Africa, meet serious humanitarian needs, and build resilience in this region. Furthermore, I raised concern that Kenya, the Horn of Africa region, and other parts of the African continent, as well as the global south, are disproportionately impacted by global climate change and its effects. We are not only affected in actual and potential threats to our environment, but also in regard to our livelihoods and the very existence. I called on Japan and G7 to lend robust support to initiatives aimed at addressing climate change, which include the Africa Climate Summit, which will take place here in Nairobi between September 4th and September 6th this year. Kenya recognizes Japan's exemplary leadership in the climate agenda, starting all the way from Kyoto 25 years ago. Japan's commitment of 6.5 trillion yen to climate finance for developing countries for the 5 years from 2021 to 2025 is commendable. Your Excellency, we do not take for granted Japan's huge investments and support for Kenya's geothermal power development through technology, capacity building, and finance. We share with Japan the conviction that climate emergency requires substantial scaling up of financial flows to developing countries. On Africa, Kenya welcomes Japan's support for the implementation of the Africa Union's Agenda 2063, which is the continent's blueprint for sustainable development and management of strategic partnership. His Excellency and I also discussed the situation in Sudan, and we underscored the need for the international community to support Kenya, IGAD, and the Africa Union in ongoing diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict. We further agreed to call for a cessation of hostilities immediately without preconditions, assure the safety of civilians, including diplomatic and humanitarian personnel, and allow safe passage of humanitarian assistance and the safe movement of people seeking security. In our deliberations, we agreed to align also the curricula of our two countries so that more Kenyans can access skilled and quality jobs in Japan. We have also agreed on a number of bilateral issues between Kenya and Japan on the exploitation of the geothermal resources in our country. We've also agreed on a couple of other issues on the development of Dongo Kundu, a special economic zone in Mombasa, to expedite the construction and for Japan to support Japanese investors in taking space in the special economic zone. I also undertook that Kenya is going to facilitate investment of Japanese companies and also support Japan to be able to finance Kenya's infrastructure and other developments, including the PPP arrangement around our construction of dams for purposes of harvesting and storage of water, for our irrigation, for our livestock development, and for water for use in our domestic homes. Finally, His Excellency Prime Minister Kishida and I noted the significance of the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Kenya and Japan. In the past 6 decades, the two countries have successfully collaborated on highly impactful undertakings in many sectors. At this critical milestone, we consider vast scope of current and prospective engagements between Kenya and Japan, and accordingly resolved to pursue resolution of outstanding issues in greater detail. We also committed to a firm and equivocal statement on the aggression by Russia in Ukraine. And as Kenya, we believe in a rules-based international charter. The UN Charter provides a framework for respect of independence, territorial integrity of all countries. We've called for the cessation of the war and revert to dialogue as a mechanism of resolving any disputes. Continued war is denying opportunity for the people in Europe, creating huge roadblock on trade, especially of commodities, to the African continent, creating huge crisis of food and supply of agricultural farm inputs, including fertilizer, to our continent. And we call on the international community to work in concert and to collaborate in bringing the Russia-Ukraine war to an end. I want to thank you very much for listening to me. Mr. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
It is a great pleasure to visit Kenya at this milestone year of the 60th anniversary of our diplomatic relationship. President Ruto and all the members of Kenya, I express my heartfelt gratitude to the very warm hospitality. Since my attendance at TICAD 6 as the foreign minister, it is my first visit to Kenya after 7 years. During these 7 years, the Japan-Kenya relationship has advanced tremendously, including economy, investment, and in many other areas. Kenya is the hub of a major economic area in East Africa and is a major power in Africa, contributing proactively to the peace and stability of the region and beyond in the international fora. Today, through my discussion with President Ruto, who took office after the democratic election of last September, I was given this opportunity to hear the voice of Africa directly as the presidency of the G7. I shall endeavor to reflect our discussion in the deliberations at the G7 Hiroshima Summit this month. Regarding the situation in Sudan, I expressed my grave concern and added how encouraged I am about the initiative by President Ruto offering his mediation in an effort to try to resolve the situation by Africa themselves. As for Japan, I told the President that as the G7 presidency and a member of the UN Security Council, that Japan will make a proactive contribution. And as part of that endeavor, we will dispatch the special envoy for the Horn of Africa to respective countries, and in order to respond to the deteriorating humanitarian situations in Sudan and in neighboring countries, we will promptly consider emergency humanitarian assistance together with the international community, and affirmed that we will coordinate closely with Kenya. On top of that, I agreed with President Ruto to further reinforce the relationship between Japan and Kenya based on the achievements of TICAD 8 held last August. Kenya is one of the leading locations for Japanese businesses to establish presence, and startups are developing enormously, and Japanese startups that resolve social challenges by innovation are also active. There is an ongoing plan for a large-scale data center by Japanese companies that is expected to become the hub for the upgrading of ICT base in Africa, and I have recognized the importance of strengthening and promoting the business and investment relations between Japan and Kenya. Japan emphasizes investment in people. In order to advance the levels of the industries in Kenya, we affirmed our cooperation to promote the cultivation of industrial human resources together. We also agreed to launch the industry dialogue to accelerate our bilateral industrial cooperation. Kenya is the very country where Prime Minister Abe back in 2016 first advocated for a free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP. Today, in order to further promote the new plan of FOIP released this March at this place of the birth of FOIP, we affirmed our continued specific cooperation, such as the infrastructure development of Mombasa Port, which is a strategic location of the northern corridor of East Africa. In addition, we confirmed to work on the areas such as solar photovoltaics, green hydrogen, geothermal power generation, included in the Memorandum of Agreements concluded at TICAD 8 between the businesses and the government of our countries, and continue to support Kenya's energy efforts. I expressed how Japan respects Kenya's initiatives to play a proactive role for the peace and stability of East Africa, and communicated that in view of FOIP, Japan will further cooperate for the peace and stability of the region.